The room froze the second he said it. "I do not accept this order," the man at the defense table announced, his accent polished, his voice carrying like it had been trained in marble halls. "In my country, no judge speaks to me this way." 5, 7, 10 seconds of unreal silence followed. The bailiff's hand hovered an inch closer to his holster without touching it. The clerk's fingers stopped above the keyboard. In the third row, a woman in a motorized wheelchair shut her eyes as if she already knew what came next. At the bench, the judge did not move. He had been on that raised platform in Providence Municipal Court for over 4 decades. He had seen rage, tears, entitlement, and fear. But he had rarely witnessed a defendant look directly into his eyes in open court and try to invalidate the authority of the room itself. The case file in front of him read, Case No. 2025, TF 114232, City of Providence, versus Prince Khalid al-Rashan. The charge summary was, on paper, almost ordinary. Failure to yield at a marked crosswalk, reckless operation, failure to stop at the scene of an injury. But nothing about this morning was ordinary. Not the black SUVs with diplomatic plates idling outside the courthouse since 7:45 a.m. Not the 2 men in tailored suits sitting behind the defense table, eyes scanning every exit. And not the fact that the man refusing to accept a municipal court order was the second son of a foreign monarch whose face appeared on his country's currency. The judge folded his hands. "Let me be sure I understood you correctly, sir," he said calmly. "You are stating, on the record, that you will not comply with a lawful order of this court?" The prince's jaw tightened. "I am stating that no small local court in your country has the authority to command a member of my family." The gallery stiffened. Ordinary citizens, people here for parking tickets, stalling registrations, and school zone cameras, suddenly understood they were watching something rare. A man who lived his entire life above rules, crashing into a system that was supposed to treat everyone the same. On the left side of the room, the woman in the wheelchair opened her eyes again. Her name was Layla Rahman. She was 58. She had been a nurse's aide for 20 years before the spinal cord injury that took her ability to walk. She hadn't come to court for herself. She had come to see whether the law that nearly crushed her at an intersection 2 months earlier still applied when the driver was a prince. The judge glanced at the digital clock mounted above the courtroom door. 9:37 a.m. The transcript would later note that the silence after the prince's refusal lasted 9 full seconds. 9 seconds in which everyone in that room confronted the same question. What happens when a man used to palaces and motorcades tells a municipal judge that his authority stops at the edge of a royal title? The answer would not arrive quickly, but it would arrive. And when it did, the room would not be the same. The morning had started like any other calendar call. The clerk worked through the list with professional rhythm. Case 2025 PK 2207. Expired registration. Case 2025 SZ0193. School zone camera violation. A single mother explained why her meter ran out while she waited on a delayed prescription. A college student apologized for missing a no parking sign hidden behind a tree limb. A retired bus driver stood trembling as he tried to describe a snowstorm that swallowed every lane marker on Atwells Avenue. The judge listened, adjusted fines, dismissed what could be dismissed, warned where warnings were enough. At 9:21 a.m., the clerk took a breath. Her eyes shifted to the bold-faced line midway through the docket. Her tone changed. "Next matter," she announced. "Case number 2025, TF 11432, City of Providence versus Khalid bin Omar al-Rashan. Charges include failure to yield at a marked crosswalk under RI General Laws, paragraph 31 to 18 to 3, reckless operation under paragraph 31, 27 to 4, and failure to stop at the scene of an injury under paragraph 31 to 26 to 1. A murmur rolled through the room like low thunder. At the defense table, a man in a charcoal suit stood first. "Good morning, Your Honor," he said. "Attorney Mark Ellison, admitted pro hac vice, representing His Highness Prince Khalid al-Rashan of the Kingdom of Qasira." He gestured toward the man still seated beside him. "My client." The prince rose a half-second later, not in obedience, but in practiced choreography. He was in his early 30s, black hair neatly combed, cufflinks catching the courtroom's fluorescent light. The watch under his shirt cuff was worth more than most of the cars parked outside. Behind the prince, two security officers in navy suits sat with hands folded, eyes sharp. Their lapel pins bore a foreign crest. The judge nodded once. He recognized the name. He had seen it on briefing summaries from the State Department liaison the week before. Still, his voice stayed even. "Good morning, counsel." "Good morning, sir." On the right side of the room, the city prosecutor rose, shuffling papers. "Good morning, Your Honor. Assistant City Solicitor Emily Perez for the City of Providence. Also present is the complaining witness, Ms. Layla Rahman." All eyes shifted toward the second row. Layla maneuvered her wheelchair forward a few inches with the joystick, cheeks flushing under the sudden attention. A dark scarf framed her face. The thick gloves on her hands were worn smooth at the palms from daily use. She gave the slightest nod toward the bench. The judge nodded back, then looked down at the case file. The police report on top was 3 pages long, clipped to photographs printed on standard office paper. A body cam log sheet was attached with a staple that had rusted at one corner. He slid his reading glasses onto his nose. "Clerk, recite the factual summary from the complaint, please." The clerk read. On October 3rd, 2025, at approximately 19 to 42 hours, Providence Police Dispatch recorded a 911 call reporting a vehicle entering a marked crosswalk while pedestrians were present at the intersection of Exchange Terrace and Union Street. Caller reported a woman in a motorized wheelchair nearly struck. Responding officer number 547, Patrolman James McKenna, arrived at approximately 19 to 47 hours. Dash cam and body-worn camera activated at 19:46:58. She turned the page. Officer McKenna observed a black 2024 Mercedes Maybach S-Class with diplomatic registration DPL QSR 002 parked adjacent to the curb. Vehicle occupied by driver and 2 security personnel. Plate indicated diplomatic mission vehicle assigned to the consulate of the Kingdom of Qasira in New York. Complainant identified the Maybach as the vehicle that entered the crosswalk. On the audio record, the words sounded dry, clean, almost clinical. Nothing about them conveyed the way Layla's heart had punched against her ribs when 2 tons of armored car rolled toward her on wet pavement. The judge tapped his pen once, then looked up. "Ms. Rahman," he said gently, "you're here without counsel today." "Yes, Your Honor," she answered. Her voice was soft but steady. "I just wanted to be here." He nodded. "Very well. Attorney Ellison." He turned back to the defense table. "Your client has entered a plea of not guilty?" "Yes, Your Honor." "And before we proceed, I'd like to note on the record that His Highness has sovereign immunity with respect to any criminal process. He appears today as a courtesy." The phrase hung in the air, as a courtesy, like perfume sprayed over something sour. The judge raised one eyebrow. "A courtesy," he repeated. "Yes, Your Honor. Under long-standing principles of international comity, members of the ruling family of Qasira enjoy status equivalent to diplomatic agents. We are not conceding jurisdiction." People in the gallery shifted uncomfortably. They weren't lawyers. They didn't know the Vienna Convention from the phone book, but they understood the implication. If you were rich and royal enough, the rules might not touch you. The judge turned a page. "Your memorandum cites the Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations Article 31, he said. "You're asserting functional immunity for conduct performed in the exercise of official functions." "That is correct." "And Which official function precisely was His Highness exercising when his vehicle entered a crosswalk against the signal while a woman in a wheelchair was crossing with the walk sign? For the first time that morning, a crack appeared in the attorney's polished tone. Your Honor, His Highness was on an official visit related to investment negotiations with state officials. His time is highly structured. There were security concerns at that intersection. His security detail deemed it necessary to avoid lingering in that part of town. In the second row, Layla's hands curled around the armrests of her chair. Security concerns. That was what her life had been reduced to in their report. The judge closed the file for a moment. Counselor, he said quietly, immunity is not a magic word that deletes facts. This city still has a pedestrian who nearly lost her life in that crosswalk. We're going to hear what happened. He turned his gaze to the uniformed officer sitting by the wall. Officer McKenna, please come forward. The officer rose, boots thudding softly against the floor. He looked younger standing near the bench, his shoulders slightly tightened under the weight of the room. State your name and badge number for the record. Patrolman James McKenna, badge 547, Providence Police Department, Your Honor. You responded to the call at 1947 hours on October 3rd? Yes, sir. Describe what you saw when you arrived. The officer swallowed once. The Maybach was pulled over at the curb. Ms. Rahman was on the sidewalk near the curb cut, visibly shaken. There were tire tracks across the paint in the crosswalk, fresh. The signal data later showed the pedestrian signal was on walk during the incident time. And the driver? Identified as Prince Khalid al-Rashan, security staff with him. They were firm? How so? Well, Your Honor, when I approached the vehicle at timestamp 1948 to 12, he glanced at the log sheet. One of the security officers stepped between me and the driver's door, told me in no uncertain terms that His Highness did not answer questions in the street. The judge's pen paused mid-stroke. And the complainant? Did you speak with Ms. Rahman? Yes, Your Honor. At 1949:37 on the body cam record, she reported that the vehicle came through the crosswalk while she was already a third of the way across. She had the right of way. She said she froze and couldn't move the chair fast enough. The car stopped maybe a foot away. The room exhaled softly as one. 1 foot. 12 inches between a stranger's bumper and the only set of wheels that allowed Layla to cross any street at all. The judge turned toward the clerk. Play body cam segment starting at 1948. Ooh. The speakers crackled to life. Rain hissed against asphalt. Sirens murmured faintly in the distance. Then came the officer's recorded voice. Sir, I need you to remain in the vehicle while I speak with the complainant. A different voice answered, clipped, accented, layered with entitlement. You need to speak to my security chief, not to me. I'm speaking to the driver, sir. This is a safety investigation. You're speaking to a prince. Another man cut in. Watch your tone. The judge glanced briefly at the prince. The prince stared straight ahead, expression composed. The audio continued. Ma'am, are you hurt anywhere? Officer McKenna's voice asked. A woman's voice answered, shaken but trying to steady. Layla's. My heart. That's all. I thought he wouldn't stop. Did you have the walk signal? Yes. It was green. I don't move fast. The audio crackled as the mic shifted. Then came the sentence that would later be quoted in training manuals across the state. Tell her, the prince's voice said, that people like her should not be in the street when important convoys are coming through. Body cam timestamp 1950. 03. The line hit the courtroom like a slap. The judge reached over and pressed the pause button himself. 5 seconds of silence. 7. 10. Layla's eyes shone. The prince's jaw tightened, but he did not look at her. The judge removed his glasses, folded them, and set them on the bench. Officer, he said quietly, why is that portion of the recording not referenced in your written report? McKenna's throat worked. noted the statement as disrespectful remark by driver, Your Honor, but I did not quote it verbatim. At the time, I wasn't sure how it would be handled for a foreign dignitary. At the defense table, Attorney Ellison straightened. Your Honor, this is precisely why we cautioned against over-reliance on body cam rhetoric in matters involving diplomatic guests. Cultural misunderstandings, differences in... The judge held up his hand. Counselor, we're not discussing tone. We're discussing a recorded statement about people like her not belonging in the street. In this city, crosswalks belong to everyone who obeys the signal, regardless of their mobility, origin, or royal title. He looked back at Layla, and Ms. Rahman had the signal. Yes, Your Honor, she whispered. When he turned back to the prince, the temperature in his voice had cooled. Your Highness, he said evenly, do you dispute that it is your voice on that recording? The prince lifted his chin a fraction. I do not recall the precise words, he said. There was rain, confusion, many people speaking at once, but if I said something that offended this woman, it was not my intention to cause her harm. Intent! The word floated between them, empty of the weight that everyone else in that courtroom understood. Harm didn't always come with bruises. Sometimes it came in the way a car didn't stop until it was almost too late. Sometimes it came in the way a stranger spoke about people like her as if their right to occupy space was negotiable. The judge reopened the file. Let's talk about harm, he said. Not only physical, but legal. Because this is where your refusal to accept a court order becomes more than just an insult to this institution. He tapped the top sheet. At the last hearing, held in chambers at your counsel's request, this court issued a provisional order requiring your presence today and directing you, in plain language, to either accept responsibility and make Ms. Rahman whole or present a lawful basis for declining. You signed that acknowledgement at 10:17 a.m. on December the 2nd. Do you deny that? Attorney Ellison cleared his throat. Your Honor, as we explained, His Highness signed with the understanding that I asked the prince, the judge said, without raising his voice. Your answer can wait its turn. The prince's color darkened, unused to being cut off. I signed many papers that day, he said coldly. I do not study every footnote of every provincial document I am handed in this country. Layla's hand tightened again on the armrest of her chair. Provincial. That was what this room was to him, what this city was, what her near death was. Something small, like background noise, like people sitting in folding chairs while his motorcade moved through lights. The judge exhaled once. Your Highness, he said, I'm going to explain something as clearly as I can, not only for you, but for everyone in this room and anyone who ever watches this recording. He let 5 seconds pass, then 7, then 10. In this courtroom, titles travel only as far as the front door. Once you step past that threshold, you are what the law says you are, a person, not more, not less, a person with obligations toward other people. You don't get to opt out because the world calls you Highness. The prince's eyes flashed. And I am telling you, he said, voice rising slightly, that in my country, judges do not lecture princes about their obligations. In my country, the judge replied quietly, crosswalks do not ask for passports before they protect you. The line landed. Slowly. Deeply. Nobody in the gallery moved. The refusal came after the recess. For 20 minutes, the courtroom emptied into the hallway while security huddled with the prince and his attorney in a side conference room, voices sharp behind a partially closed door. Layla waited near the window, watching a light rain sweep across the courthouse steps. She could see the wheels of her chair reflected faintly in the glass. Her whole world balanced on 2 small circles of rubber. A janitor pushed a mop bucket past her, humming softly under his breath. He gave her a small nod of solidarity without knowing why she was there. At 10:26 a.m., the bailiff called the room back to order. Case 2025 TF 11432 resumed, the clerk announced. Everyone took their places again. The prince's posture had hardened into something almost ceremonial, a man stepping once more into a script he knew by heart. The judge looked from him to Layla, then back at the file. Before the break, he said, this court was prepared to entertain a resolution involving restitution, a formal apology on the record, and a written statement acknowledging the right of mobility-impaired pedestrians to full access of public space. I want to be clear. That door was open. He closed the folder. And now? Attorney Ellison rose. Now, Your Honor. After consultation with his security advisors and representatives of his government by secure call, His Highness is unwilling to accept any resolution that suggests fault or requires written apology. He will not accept the order as drafted. The line between refusal and defiance became plain. It was after Ellison sat down that the prince added the words that froze the room. I do not accept this order, he said. In my country, no judge speaks to me this way. The judge's gaze did not leave his. Your Highness, he said, this is not your country. The silence afterward tasted metallic. The city prosecutor stood slowly. Your Honor, she said, for the record, the city remains prepared to proceed to trial on all counts if necessary. Ms. Rahman is willing to testify. We have signal data, body cam, and 2 third-party witnesses who observed the vehicle entering the crosswalk against the walk signal. The judge nodded once. Understood. Shh. Then he did something no one expected. He turned away from the lawyers entirely and looked straight at Layla. Ms. Rahman, he said gently, would you be willing to come forward and speak for a moment? Her wheels squeaked softly as she approached the barrier. The bailiff opened the small gate beside the council tables so she could come through. When she reached the center of the well, the height difference between her and the prince became visually stark. She looked up toward the bench, not toward him. I know this is difficult, the judge said. If you prefer not to speak, you are under no obligation. She swallowed. It's okay, she said. I came here to stop being afraid of this street. He waited. When that car came at me, she began, I thought, so this is it. This is how it ends. In front of the bus stop with my grocery bag in my lap. Her hands moved restlessly against the blanket covering her legs. I used to walk fast, Your Honor. On the night shift at the hospital, I could pull a whole hallway's worth of linen in one go. I never imagined I'd be measuring my life in how long it takes to cross 12 painted lines. Her voice didn't tremble. It thickened. When his car stopped, I thought maybe he'd roll down the window, ask if I was okay, even just look at me. But he never did. He stared straight ahead. His security talked for him. I watched his brake lights and felt like I was invisible. She hesitated, then turned her head toward the prince for the first time. I don't care about his title, she said. I just want the law that protects me when I roll into that crosswalk to mean the same thing no matter who is behind the wheel. The judge let the words settle. 5 seconds. 7. 10. He looked back at the prince. You just heard the person whose life passed within 12 inches of your bumper, he said. You can continue to stand behind healthily abstract phrases like immunity and courtesy appearance. Or you can respond to her as one human being to another. The prince's eyes flicked briefly toward Layla, then away again. With respect, he said slowly. I regret that she felt fear, but I do not admit legal responsibility. If I say I am sorry, it will be taken as a confession. My government will not accept that. It was the most honest thing he had said all morning. Fear of confession. Fear of consequence. Fear of losing a sliver of the invisible armor that had always surrounded his family. The judge leaned back in his chair. Very well, he said. Then we move from the realm of voluntary conscience to the limits of legal authority. He turned to the prosecutor. Ms. Perez, under Rhode Island law, failure to yield with injury or near injury is a misdemeanor. However, When the defendant is a foreign official, our enforcement mechanisms intersect with federal authority. Is the State Department liaison present? A woman in a navy blazer rose from the back row. Yes, Your Honor. Rachel Dominguez, Office of Foreign Missions. Ms. Dominguez, has your office been following this matter? Yes, Your Honor. We received your preliminary report after the last hearing and forwarded it through diplomatic channels. And the response? She took a breath. The Kingdom of Kasira has declined to waive immunity, but has expressed, quote, regret for any misunderstanding, and requested that the matter be, quote, handled with appropriate discretion. A faint, bitter chuckle rippled through the gallery. The judge nodded once. All right, then let me state clearly what this court can and cannot do. He looked at the prince. Your Highness, I cannot, as a practical matter, incarcerate you. If I issue a warrant, it becomes an international issue that reaches far beyond the harm in this room. I recognize that. Ellison relaxed by a fraction. But, the judge continued, immunity is not erasure. This court can still make factual findings. It can still enter civil judgments. It can still send a record of your conduct to agencies that control your freedom to move in and out of this country. And it can still speak on the record about what happened in that crosswalk. He opened the file one final time. Based on the uncontroverted evidence, signal timing data, body cam footage, and testimony from witnesses, I find as a matter of fact that your vehicle entered a marked crosswalk while Ms. Rahman lawfully crossed with a walk signal, that you failed to yield, and that your vehicle came within approximately 12 inches of striking her. Ellison half rose. Your Honor, we object to— Your objection is noted, the judge said calmly, and overruled as to this court's authority to make factual findings on public safety grounds. He turned to Layla. Ms. Rahman, under normal circumstances, the court would impose fines and restitution directly. Because of the immunity issues here, direct enforcement against the prince is uncertain. However, I am entering a civil judgment in your favor in the amount of $25,000 for emotional distress and loss of sense of security in public mobility. This judgment will be transmitted to the federal government and attached to any future application by His Highness for entry, extended stay, or property acquisition in the United States. The prince's head snapped up. You cannot do that, he protested. You said you cannot punish me. The judge's gaze was steady. I said I cannot jail you, he replied. I did not say the law has to pretend this never happened. He let that line sit. Then he added more softly, the law cannot force a conscience to awaken, but it can refuse to help it go back to sleep. Silence followed. Longer this time. 12 full seconds. In those 12 seconds, a realization slid across the prince's features. He did not fear the money. $25,000 was a rounding error in his accounts. But the idea of a permanent, documented stain attached to his name every time he touched this country's soil, that pierced somewhere the law could not usually reach. He turned to his attorney sharply. They exchanged a rapid, whispered conversation in a mix of English and Arabic. The security officers leaned in, faces tense. Layla watched all of it with her hands folded in her lap. Finally, the prince straightened. If I satisfy this judgment voluntarily, he said slowly. Does it remain? The judge didn't blink. The record remains, he said, but the way history reads it is up to you. Another beat. Then for the first time all morning, the prince looked directly at Layla and did not look away. What would you do with that money? He asked. The question was almost a challenge. Layla took a breath. I'd start a small fund, she said, for ramps, for curb cuts in places that still don't have them, for people who are one cracked sidewalk away from staying home forever. The prince considered her for a long, quiet moment. In his world, streets were cleared before his motorcade left the compound. Sidewalks were never broken where he walked. Doors opened before he reached them. He had never once thought about the gap between curb and street as anything but decoration. Now, in a small courtroom in a small city he barely respected, that gap looked like the distance between humanity and negligence. He lowered his eyes. "Your Honor," he said, voice lower, "if I instruct my financial office to pay this amount into such a fund, more if necessary, would that be acceptable to the court?" The judge did not smile. "That is between you and your conscience," he said, "but I will note any voluntary action on the record." The prince nodded once. "I will pay it," he said, "not as admission, but as recognition." Layla's lip trembled. "I don't need your title," she said quietly. "I just need drivers like you to see me before it's too late." He looked at her, really looked at her, and for a flicker of a moment the distance between their lives narrowed. Then he bowed his head a fraction, less than he would bow in any palace, but more than he had bowed to anyone outside of one. "I see you now," he said. The judge picked up his gavel. "Let the record reflect," he said, "that the defendant has agreed on the record to satisfy the civil judgment for the benefit of accessibility improvements in this city. This court will transmit its findings and the complete body cam record to the Office of Foreign Missions and the Department of Transportation for use in future policy regarding VIP motorcades and pedestrian zones." He paused, then added, "Titles may shield you from some punishments. They do not shield you from truth, and they do not excuse you from seeing the people in your path." He brought the gavel down. "Case 2025 TF 11432 closed." No one applauded. What happened instead was quieter. In the gallery, people rose, not all at once, not like a standing ovation, but like witnesses acknowledging that something important had just been written into the air. The State Department liaison typed a note that would become part of a cable sent across an ocean before sunset. The city prosecutor underlined the words VIP motorcade protocol on her legal pad 3 times. Officer McKenna stared at the bench, his face tight with the realization that his next report would never again soften a quote like the one he had heard himself say on the recording. Layla backed her chair slowly away from the well. As she passed the defense table, the prince's security officers looked away, uncomfortable. The prince himself did not. For the second and final time that morning, their eyes met. "Ms. Rahman," he said quietly, so only she and the stenographer could hear, "in my country we do not have many ramps. Perhaps we should." She held his gaze. "Maybe you start with crosswalks," she replied. Outside, the rain had stopped. The crosswalk paint in front of the courthouse gleamed wetly in the thin sun. In the months that followed, the judgment paid into the fund created by the city would finance 3 new curb cuts, a repaired ramp at a public library, and a pilot program for better signage at high-risk intersections used by mobility-impaired residents. The Department of Transportation would quietly revise its guidance on motorcade routes, instructing advance teams to prioritize streets with accessible crossings and to treat all pedestrian signals as non-negotiable, regardless of VIP schedules. The Office of Foreign Missions would add a short, blunt paragraph to its briefing packet for visiting dignitaries. Local traffic laws apply to mission vehicles at all times. Failure to yield to pedestrians, particularly those using mobility devices, will be recorded and may impact future entry privileges. No press conference would mention Layla by name. No foreign newspaper would run a story about a prince who almost learned too late that crosswalks are equalizers. But the record would remain. So would the ramps. Months later, when Layla rolled across the newly smooth curb at the corner of Exchange and Union, the motorized hum of her chair sounded different in her ears. Not like a fragile machine navigating a hostile world, more like a small, steady engine of proof that the law had seen her. In another part of the world, a convoy would stop one car length back from a crosswalk because a driver who used to glide through intersections without thinking now heard, in the back of his mind, the words spoken in a provincial courtroom far away. Titles may shield you from some punishments. They do not shield you from truth. And somewhere between those 2 points on the map, between palace and crosswalk, the idea of what a prince owed to people like her would never again be as simple as it had been the night his bumper stopped 12 inches too late. If you believe justice shouldn't check your title before it protects you, consider subscribing and sharing stories like this, where a small courtroom reminds the world that the law's first duty is to the people in its path.